Finally, the next episode of Wildlife. Let's check it out.
Well, why don't we just activate it and see what happens? Epic. Epic shot. If you haven't figured it out, we all get superpowers.
In today's Recreating Wildlife episode, I'm going to recreate the Session 7 wildcard, recreate Session 1's wildcard, and so much more, so let's get into it. In the first episode of this series, the lives were controlled by 6 different player teams. That has now been replaced by a global variable unique to each player. When /setLives is ran, the command still creates 4 teams: dark green, green, and so on, and sets the player's global lives variable to 6. Upon a player dying, their lives variable is reduced by 1, and depending on the value of the variable, depends what team you go into. 4 plus lives go into dark green, 3 lives goes into green, 2 lives go into yellow, and 1 life goes into red. This new system also allows for negative lives. I also added the /addLife command, which just adds 1 to your life total. Now on to something more interesting. Session 1's wildcard was by far the simplest wildcard in Wildlife, and recreating it was relatively simple. To recreate the part of the wildcard that increased your player size when jumping, I created a procedure that checks when an entity jumps, and if the entity is a player and wildcard 3 is active, it gets the value of the scale attribute of the player and adds 0.1 on top of the value. The shrinking half of the wildcard was slightly more difficult. The only way I could think of doing it was creating a new keybind, and when it's pressed, it does the same checks as the jumping procedure by checking to see if wildcard 3 is active. If it is active, it will also get the scale attribute of the player, and instead of adding 0.1, it removes 0.1 from the value. In the mod, the functionality of wildcard 1 is put onto wildcard 3, so that's why in the checks of the wildcard, it sees if wildcard 3 is active instead of wildcard 1. And this system is fully working in game, so every time I jump, I get bigger, and every time I press shift, I get smaller. Now on to the next thing I recreated from Wildlife. The wildcard from Session 7 gave every player from Wildlife a unique superpower. To recreate this wildcard, I have to create 2 new systems: the randomization of the superpowers and the activation of the superpowers. So let's start with the randomization of the superpowers. When the wildcard is chosen, it sets wildcard 1 to active, allowing for the keybind to be activated. When the keybind is pressed for the first time, after the wildcard is selected, it will generate a random number which correlates to a random superpower, then turns another global variable chosen to true for that player, meaning the player will only get 1 superpower. When the keybind is pressed again, and the superpower has been chosen, the procedure will check the value of another variable enabled. If enabled is false, the procedure will turn enabled to true and activate the superpower, which correlates to the player's superpower variable. However, if enabled is true, the procedure will set enabled to false and deactivate that player's superpower. I currently have 2 superpowers made, one being a recreation of Tango's power, which gives you speed but hunger when active, and half a Scar's power, which lets you sit on anything when activated. Like I said with wildcards, I'll be taking community suggested superpowers, so leave your ideas in the comments. And speaking of community suggested wildcards, let's add one. Starting off with a simple wildcard suggested by Revolution, which makes it so everyone is given 30 unregenerable hearts. So it's exactly the same as the Secret Life health system. When the wildcard is selected, every player's max health attribute is set to 60, and a procedure that checks when an entity is hurt, and if it's a player, the procedure gets the value of the max health attribute and reduces it by the amount of damage the player took. That's pretty much all I've got for this short video. So leave all your wildcard and superpower ideas in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and watch this video next of every life reacting to Martin's death.